Good morning, everyone. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to have so many folks willing to join us here this morning. And thanks so much to Sue and Martha for putting this together. So today, as Sue indicated, I'm here to talk to you about some strategies and resources to help students connect their psychology skills to the workforce. Before we jump into that, I'm sorry, I've got way too many things with the poll and everything on my screen. Let me adjust things a little so I can see. So as you mentioned, I am joining you from the University of Toronto, and I just want to take a moment. There's my beautiful campus in my beautiful city to just acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and today is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples from across Turtle Island, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And I'm sure we have folks joining us from all sorts of different locations today. So welcome, everyone. Does anyone, let me see, well, yeah, I'll put these up here first. Does anybody know who these people are? I know one, you'll know one for sure, and what they have in common. And you can go ahead and kind of put your guess in the chat if you are familiar with any of these folks. I'm going to put up some other, maybe some more familiar faces. Apologies with the digging. And yes, Heather's got it. So all of these folks have undergraduate degrees in psychology. So yeah, so some of those are well known, right? Natalie Portman and Jon Stewart. You've got Mark Zuckerberg there, Wes Craven. Few faces you might not be familiar with is up here we have Irene Rosenfeld, and she's been CEO of Frito-Lay and Kraft Foods and listed numerous times as one of Forbes' most 100 powerful women in the world. We have down here Jamie Dimon, who's an American billionaire businessman. He's been the chairman and chief executive officer of JP Morgan Chase. And then down here we have Guy Kawasaki, who was one of the Apple employees back in the mid 80s, who was responsible for marketing their Macintosh computer line. And he's currently the what do we call it? Chief evangelist for Canva. It's a Canva program that maybe many of you are probably familiar with. So basically, it's huge ambassador for their product. So fervently promoting a positive message that advocates to others to buy or use their product. And so this guy Kawasaki is a chief evangelist for Canva. I will tell you, he's not so much a chief evangelist for his psych undergrad degrees. If you go to his website, this is what you find. So he matriculated to Stanford, graduated in 1976 with a major in psychology, which was the easiest major he could find. And then goes on a little bit to talk about his future. So there are a lot of misconceptions out there about psychology. Again, I'm going to pause for a moment if you want to throw some common misperceptions about psychology that you run into or come across. If you want to go ahead and pop them into the chat. You can read minds, absolutely, right? Not useful, only for therapy. Yeah, absolutely. No math, you have to go to grad school for it to be worth it. Yes, absolutely. That you're not going to get a job, right? You're going to be flipping burgers. All right, I think these are all that I have, right? So that it's easy, that it's a soft, gooey science, right? Or not a real science, doesn't require any math, that you're going to be a therapist. Right, that you could read people's minds, still get that one, right, that you won't be able to find a job or to find a good job. So this is the one that we're really going to try to tackle a bit today. And the way we're going to come at that is by skills. So my goal for today is to provide you with strategies and resources, right, that you can use to help your students recognize the transferable skills, right, that we know that they're gaining in their coursework, and an understanding of how those skills might connect to the workforce. right. So if you do like I forget what I was even Googling, something about skills, and all this stuff comes up about how skills are the, the skills economy now, that the currency of the future is skills. So this huge emphasis on skill development, that this is the way that people are going to get jobs in the future, that we can't think about sort of careers or job titles, that so much of that is going to change. There's estimates that I think about a third of jobs worldwide are going to be changed, transformed by technology within the next 10 years or so. And so this huge push on skills and skill development. I found, sorry, cursor, there we go. So this is kind of recent from LinkedIn, looking at from LinkedIn Learning, looking at the 2024, so most in-demand skills. And so they did this by looking across their something like 1 billion users on LinkedIn these days, and across 200 different regions. And the top skill of the moment being adaptability, right? Flexibility. And that across all these different lists that you'll come up looking at the most sort of valued skills, the types of skills that employers are really looking for. There's a huge emphasis in all these lists on what are, sort of commonly referred to as sort of soft skills, right? Or people skills, or these transferable skills, whatever you want to call them, right? So communication, teamwork, leadership, management, and so on. All right, so psychology, those of us who are educators in psychology have certainly recognized this need for students to develop skills, develop important skills, and perhaps even more importantly, as we know they've always been developing skills, but to help them recognize these skills that they're developing, to recognize them, to be able to articulate them to employers, and so on. So about 5 years ago now, CABE, before I joined, CABE put together a working group, and they came up with this beautiful document that is known as the Skillful Psychology Student. And so Karen Offal's there, and lots of other folks who are on this working group. And what they did is they put together this list of skills. So it lists 17 different skills you can kind of see here. Across 5 different domains, where we know that these are skills that psychology undergraduates are developing throughout their courses, and are also skills. There's overlap between those skills and skills that we know that employers really value. And so we have this sort of key list of skills that, again, we know psychology students are developing, that we know that employers value. And so this is a really helpful document for instructors to sort of look at and recognize, okay, yes, here are these different skills. What are different ways that I might be able to go about and help my students recognize that these are the skills that they're learning throughout their degree. And since the publication of the Skillful Psychology Student, there's been a number of different sort of applications of this work that have come out, a few of which, of course, I'm going to share with you today. So there's this transferable skills resource I'm going to show you here in a moment. Michael Madsen and his colleagues at the University of Southern Mississippi have an article that they published recently in the Society of, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in Psychology, looking at using the Skillful Psychology Student for program review and implementation. So having faculty go through their syllabi and figure out which skills they're emphasizing in their courses, looking at how aware students are of these different skills, and whether they feel like they are actually being developed across their curriculum, and so on. And then, as you mentioned, the key thing that I'm here to talk about today is this, this joint STP-CABE working group that was put together and really tasked with sort of taking this document as our starting place and figuring out what we can do to help instructors sort of use this more effectively in their courses. All right, so before I get into that, I do want to highlight this resource that's available on, and I will share it after. Actually, I can pop it into the chat real quick. It's numerous documents, so it takes a little bit of digging to find, and I can help anyone find it after. But it is on, oh, sorry, I don't think that's sent properly. I'll send it after. It is on the STP Resources for Teachers website. And it is a number of different documents. But what it does is the key thing here I want to show you is it's a fillable PDF that you can do as sort of an end of the semester wrap up in your classes, or encourage students to do, where they go through and they think about all of the different activities that they engaged in as part of the course. And it has these sort of really explicit step-by-step instructions for students, and helps them match these behaviors that they engaged in as part of the class, all of those things that they did as part of the class, map those on to the skills that are included in the Skillful Psychology Student. So organize into categories, right? Obviously includes a copy of the Skillful Psychology Student for the students to be familiar, right? They sort of lump things together, right? So here's all the communication behaviors I engaged in, personal things, social behaviors, and so on. Right, thinking, okay, do I have evidence right from this class that I engaged in, information management and oral communication, that kind of go through and check boxes of the different skills that they developed. And then this final step here gives examples and instructions for kind of how they might turn this into sort of effective sentences and statements that they can put into cover letters or this type of thing. And so there's some examples there. They can save it. The idea is that they could do this for every course. There's a different version of the fillable PDF that is targeted for multiple classes, so they can do sort of multiple classes at one. This is meant to be kind of, like an end of the semester activity that students can do and that I've done in my classes. So just one example of an application of the Skillful Psychology Student that is out there. And I have a little bit of data, feedback from students who've done this, right, that do seem to find it helpful, right, that we know that it's easy to just, you get to the end of the semester, you just sort of move on, that this is a way to help students, sort of take that time to reflect on what they've actually learned, in the class, document those skills, and then they can go back and review it later on. Okay, but what I want to spend most of my time talking about today are the materials that came about as part of this STP-CABE joint working group. So this was a massive working group. It was co-chaired by myself as sort of the CABE representative and Janet Peters as the STP representative. There were, I think, a total of 18 of us in this working group, just a huge working group, a diverse set of faculty from all sorts of different institutions across 3 different countries. Who came together, and the task that Diane tasked us with was to create resources for our most common courses that will help instructors emphasize to students the key skills that they're developing in that course. And so we ended up focusing on these 9 courses that you see here that we kind of identified as being sort of the most common or core courses, in a typical psychology curriculum. And then because there's 18 of us, what we did is we divided into subgroups or subcommittees. So each little subgroup was tasked with 1 or 2 of these courses. And what we wanted to do was say, okay, we have this list of 17 skills. That's a lot of skills. And it's too much to just kind of be like, oh, look, you're going to develop all these 17 skills, right, as part of this course. One, that's probably not true that you're getting, that all those skills in a single course. So what we wanted to do was to help make it a little bit more manageable and help instructors and then help students sort of narrow in on particular skills. So we set each of the subgroups with the initial task of identifying 3 to 4 of those skills from the Skillful Psychology Student that they felt, based on their experience teaching the class, based on their expertise, right, just based on what they felt, were going to be the skills that were the most relevant, right, or most applicable to that particular course. Emphasize them. And then we had sort of everyone come up with different ideas of, okay, what can we do with this? What are the different types of resources that we might be able to create for instructors that would be helpful? And so everyone kind of came up with their own ideas for particular resources. So we had tons of great ideas for resources across the different courses. We ended up covering, I think, 11 of the 17 skills. And what we ended up with, and what I'm going to share with you a little bit today, are these different types of resources. So for each class, we have syllabus inserts, which I'll show you some examples of, PowerPoint templates, and I'll show you some examples of what's included in those PowerPoint templates. And then we also just came up with a sort of sample resume and CV. And across these resources, our emphasis was really on skill identification, right? So just helping students identify what these skills are, right? What does it mean to have these different types of skills? Recognizing how this skill is developed in this particular course, and then recognizing how that skill might be taken from that course, right? And what it might look like when it is applied in a workplace context. All right. So for example, I just pulled intro psych as an example. It's one that many of us teach. I didn't look at the survey results for how many of y'all teach intro psych. It's one of the ones that I teach. And so what this subgroup came up with is, again, this is our sort of starting page, and they identified 4 particular skills that, again, they feel are the most kind of relevant to intro psych. All right. And so these are analytical thinking, written communication, self-regulation, and inclusivity. Right, so identifying these skills, and then for each class, right, the 3 or 4 skills that the subgroup identified, they created a syllabus insert. And so this is very important to us, that it could be fit on one page, that it looked pretty, but that it's also, so you'll notice here, or if you can see, that my cursor is like blinking here. So these are all Word documents. It was really, really important to us that the resources we created be nice and ready to go, you know, plug and play for anyone who just wants to kind of pull something in and use it as is, that was absolutely a possibility, but that they were also be really flexible and easy for people to edit and modify. So they're just Word documents. You can go in, you can be like, you know what, I don't cover this skill, or I don't want to put this one, I want to include something else. I want to put in different examples. You know, this piece isn't relevant to my class. So I want to edit it out. Super, super easy for instructors to do that. So that was a really important goal that we had when we were developing the resources. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So it's skills you will gain in this course. Again, there's one of these for each of the different 9 courses that we looked at, highlighting the skill and then going through, so what does that mean, right? Well, how will we develop the skill, again, in the context of this particular class? And then how might this skill relate to my future job, right? How does this transfer into the workplace? And so just so you can see this a little bit better, here's the example here from intro psych for inclusivity, right? So what does that mean? You know, engaging in perspective taking, showing empathy, and so on. How will we develop it? And then how it might look like in the workplace. We also, so the syllabus inserts are great. Again, you can put it obviously into your syllabus. You can attach it to different assignments that you're putting together for your class. You can stick it into your learning management system, right? Again, use it in whatever way you see fit. We also don't just want to, you know, stick something right into our syllabus and assume that the students, you know, have read it and understand it. So we wanted to make sure that we were also providing some resources for instructors to kind of cover this material in class and to help them do that, you know, in whatever way we can. And so this is an example. So these are some sample PowerPoint slides, again, from the intro psych subgroup material. So this is, again, kind of just going over some of the material that's covered in the syllabus insert, right? So what can someone who has developed inclusivity do, right? What does that look like? Going through those examples, again, going through how will you develop inclusivity in this course? And again, these are just PowerPoint slides, so easily edited if instructors want to, you know, edit things to make it more appropriate for your class. So talking about you know, how different psychological, sociocultural, and biological factors interact to create the wide spectrum of human diversity, right? Where problems arise when diversity is ignored in psych research, engaging with discussions with diverse peers in class and online, talking about what inclusivity looks like in the workplace. And then we also have in the PowerPoint slides So going beyond what's sort of covered in the syllabi inserts, are some examples of jobs that require this skill, right? So jobs where this skill is really relevant or really important. And all of these are hyperlinked to the, so typically to like the ONET page, right? So a page that has tons of career information on that career. And so here, and also really importantly here, we didn't want to include just different types of psychologists, right? We wanted to try to help students recognize that these skills that they're developing, right, can transfer to all sorts of different types of career paths. And so you can see an example of these here. I'm not going to click on it and open it up for the sake of my screen, but all these different sort of examples of careers in this in this case that require inclusivity. All right, so again, going back or keeping with our intro psych example, we have the other skills that were covered. I think this can also be really helpful, right? So it's meant to, help students recognize, how these skills are developed in their course. It can also be really helpful for instructors to maybe think about things that you haven't necessarily spent too much time thinking about before in terms of the actual skills that your students are learning and how those might transfer to different contexts. So I'll give you my own example. So intro psych is a class that I teach. And when I first was kind of looking at this, I thought, oh, written communication, that doesn't really apply to my particular class. So my particular class of Psych 100 is 1,500 students. So we don't do excessive amounts of written work for obvious reasons, right? There's a little bit of writing. I do get some writing in there, but it's not extensive by any means. And so when I first looked at this, I thought, oh, I'd have to like pull that one out, right? Replace it with maybe a different skill if I'm adding these into my class. And then I read through, right, what is included in the sort of, development of written communication. And it's things like, so we have reading dense textbooks, right? Listening during lecture to extract main points, right? Taking notes during class or from the text. And I'm like, oh, like, of course my students are doing this, right? You're like taking good note taking, right? During lectures, we're going through the chapters in the text and being able to take effective notes. That's an incredibly important skill that they're developing throughout the course, which I know, but I never really stopped to really think about like, oh, the applicability of that, beyond just being a good university student, but the importance of being able to like sit in a meeting right at work and extract the main points, from that meeting, to read documents right in a workplace setting and being able to understand those, right, and again extract the main points, and so on. So I think going through and reviewing these materials can also be help instructors kind of make these connections or recognize things that you haven't necessarily spent too much time thinking about before. And then the last skill there for the intro psych, again, the self-regulation. And so again, there's also the PowerPoint, right, that goes through, right, and helps students kind of understand, right, that you can use, that you can share, first day of class and go through and be like, okay, here's the written communication skills, right? Here's how you're going to develop them in this class, right? And here's how these transfer, right, to these other workplace contexts. All right, now all of that is well and good, but that's very much us telling students, right? And we know that that's maybe, that's great, and that's important, but it can also be really, really helpful, and a lot of times more impactful if we get the students to kind of do some of this work. So in the PowerPoint slides, again, for each of the courses, we also have some examples of different activities that instructors might want to do to help students recognize and think about the skills that they're developing in their courses. So here's an example of a first day of class activity slide that's included in the PowerPoint resources. And so we see here the students are being asked, so in what ways would this skill, and after you've gone through the 3 or 4 key skills that you're emphasizing that they're going to develop in that particular course, having them think about how that would benefit their academic, professional, interpersonal life. And so there's instructions that are given, again, embedded in the PowerPoint slides, or the idea here is that you'd divide the class into quadrants, right, or different groups of 4, depending on the size of your class. that you, have the students introduce themselves, right? It's gonna be a nice sort of first day icebreaker, that you assign them one of the particular skills, right? So you get written communication, you get inclusivity, and so on, and have them, right, give them this prompt and give them a, maybe an empty Google Doc or something, right? And then just have them think about what are all of the ways that they can imagine that this skill would be beneficial to them, right, in their, again, personal, professional, academic lives. And then go through, right, have everyone kind of share their ideas, right, and really help emphasize that, major goal of this class is to help them develop, this set of transferable skills. All right, so just to give some other examples here. So this is from the statistics course. So the 4 skills that they've identified, so critical thinking, analytical thinking, judgment and decision making, familiarity with hardware and software. And again, same sort of idea with the PowerPoint slides, right? The templates there, going through helping students recognize that, making connections to different careers. So for example, here we have what has someone who has developed critical thinking do, right? Making decisions, consider alternative perspectives, being aware of one's own biases. Again, going through how that's going to be developed in this case, the context of a statistics class. So choosing appropriate statistical analyses, understanding the limits of those, working through the gray areas, going through what critical thinking looks like in the workplace. And then again, the sets of examples of careers, right, or jobs that require critical thinking. So that's stats. I want to show this is the same thing, but from the research methods subgroup. And so what you might find, and you'll notice on the website that displays all the different, has all these different resources that are there, that it indicates the skills that are highlighted for each class. And so if you're thinking, I want to talk about critical thinking, you can look at all the different courses where that comes up, take a look at the different PowerPoint slides and things that the subgroups have come up with, because it will look a little bit different, right, for each class, and you can kind of pull together ones that are the most appropriate in your particular context. So again, this is what someone has developed critical thinking do, coming from the research methods subgroup, right, what that looks like, again, in the context now of a research methods class as opposed to a stats class, different examples, right, of what critical thinking might look like in the workplace, because of course there's 1,000 different examples that you could come up with. And again, the different jobs. And again, going through these different careers, different occupations that are listed here. That can be really helpful as well, both for, I think, for faculty, as well as for students. So when I was, kind of going through things and putting slides together for today, I clicked on this one, like wholesale and retail buyer. So I'm like, what exactly does that mean? And so I go to the page and I'm reading about it, and I end up, landing on sort of fashion merchandising. And I'm trying to think, like, does that connect to psychology at all? I'm like, what's this Rachel's job on Friends? And I like try to put things together. And then I ended up at this YouTube video. It's an APA, actually, YouTube podcast. So speaking of psychology podcast, looking at, so with Carolyn Mayer, who created the Psychology of Fashion department at the London College of Fashion at the University of the Arts London, right, explaining the psychology behind our fashion choices and why psychologists are needed to help solve some of the biggest challenges facing the fashion industry now and in the future, right? So making these connections between psychology and some things that we wouldn't necessarily think of before. All right, so some other activities that are also included in the PowerPoint resources, again, with the idea that instructors can pick and choose, and just kind of a starting place for instructors to think about activities that you might want to do in your classes to help students recognize these skills. So a sample last day of class activity, we go through some practice with interview questions. So the PowerPoints include things like lists of typical types of job interview questions that students might get at a job interview. It goes over how to answer these types of questions using the STAR method. And so that's if you're not familiar, most of you I'm sure are. So that's providing details about the situation, right? So what's going on in the scenario, explaining your task, right, or your role in that particular scenario, what was the action that you took, and then what was the result or the outcome of that action that you took, and that this is a good sort of formula to use when answering job interview questions. And so the idea, and again, the instructions are there in the notes section of the PowerPoint slides, that you can have students kind of work in pairs, right? Pick a couple of the questions that you've given them that are also included on the PowerPoint slides, or you can come up with your own or additional ones, and to practice generating responses based on the STAR method, and maybe connecting it to specific scenarios or experiences that they've had in the context of your course, and then can have them kind of come together in larger groups to share their responses and evaluate kind of what was clear, what was missing, how could they improve, and so on. So all of the PowerPoint slides also include sort of an example response that's specific to the particular course. So this is within the stats class example, right? Give an example of a time when you solved a problem using critical thinking. And again, gives an example that a student might give that's sort of couched in the context of their statistics class. All right, some additional sample activities that are there. So we link to the employable skills survey, which is just employableskills.com. Students are, they can create an account if they want to save their responses. If not, they can just come back and do it as many times as they want. You don't need to create an account or anything to do this, but they can go and you can do sort of a pre-post. So this might be a first day of class activity that you do, and then you have students do it again as a last day of class activity, and see if their self-assessment of particular skills has perhaps changed from the start of class to the end. And so this provides a measure of students, communication skills, analytical inquiry skills, collaboration skills, as well as professional development skills. And I know my students really like taking this particular measure. And then finally, just the last thing I want to highlight from our working group resources is that we also have up on the STP page there that shares the working group resources, some examples of some resume and CV templates. So this is the resume template that's up there. And it's probably really hard for you to see. So we have Eric Erickson here, right? Just talking about, showing where students can kind of mention their skills, right, in the context of a resume. So talking about it up here, right? So experience in child development, strong skills related to analytical thinking, critical thinking, decision-making, right? Adaptive data analysis using particular software, and so on. Also showcasing their skills along the side here that they've developed in their courses. And I don't think I have the example here from the CV, but the same thing. So again, the sort of intention here and our hope is that with these resources, right, and by helping, right, doing what we can as instructors within the context of our class to, just sort of identify skills, right, emphasize skills to our students that will help them recognize that regardless, we know students, with a bachelor's degree in psychology are going into a hugely diverse set of different types of jobs. And what we often find is that students who don't, quote unquote, become psychologists, right? Who don't become therapists, who don't, sort of have psychology in their job title, are often ending up sort of feeling like they're not using their degree, or that their jobs. So here we have data from APA Center for Workforce Studies, right? Asking, graduates, psychology graduates, right, who are in, maybe in management, right, in sales and marketing and so on, right, with an undergraduate degree in psychology, right? how related is your job to your degree? And about 38% of those with a bachelor's degree in psychology saying like it's not related at all. And we want them, right? And we know that it is related, right? That they're learning all these really, really critical skills that are going to help them. Again, we're not training people just to become psychologists, right? Or just to become therapists, right? We're training people to have these types of transferable skills that they're going to be able to take with them to any job, really. That they decide to pursue, right? And that they may go on to, master's degrees in different areas, right? Whatever they do, we want them to see the value of their psychology degree. And one, I think, good way of doing that is to helping them recognize all of these really valuable skills that they are gaining through their psychology coursework. All right, I just want to give, so there's a list. It's just like, it's random. I think it has them clustered by their different subgroups, but just again, this is a huge diverse group of faculty who worked on the resources for the market ready psychology major. So I just want to make sure that they all get a thank you. And then I have, what's the time? Do I have time? Sorry, I lost my clock. I have some time. Okay, I'm going to share one more thing with you because I have time, as I suspected I might. And then we'll go to Q&A. That's my cursor then. There we go. One other thing I want to share with you. And this is one that the resources for it, I do have materials I can share. They're not like ready to be shared with the world kind of yet. And they're materials that I've used, and so they're not like super general, but I'm very, very happy to share with anyone who's interested. So last summer, so just about a year ago, last May, I put together and ran a online workshop for students in my department. So it was a skills focused summer workshop for psychology students, helping them sort of make the most of their psych degree, but really, really, again, helping them focus in on skills. And so this was a 2-part workshop. It was 2 hours. It took place over Zoom. And part 1 is really sort of looking back, helping the students reflect on what they've done that previous year, right? All of the skills that they've developed in their psychology courses over the past year. And then part 2 is really sort of forward looking, thinking about, okay, where do I still have gaps? What skills do I want to make sure that I maybe dedicate some time next year, right, to learning, and how might I go about doing that? So part 1 of the workshop is the course-based skill development, right? So that fillable PDF that I showed you at the beginning of the talk, going through that, right? Having them do that together. Also thinking beyond courses, right? We know that our students aren't just going to courses, that they're doing a whole host of other things. And so going through some prompts and having them do some work, thinking about, okay, you are on this, doing this extracurricular thing, right? You're volunteering here, you're doing, this and that. What are the skills that you're gaining in all these other activities that you're doing? Have them do the employable skills, self-assessment, and then having them think about, actually, I have prompts here, I'll show you. So this is, again, having them think about sort of beyond coursework, right? Skills that they've gained, right? Behaviors that they've done, right? If they're involved in sports, right? If they're involved in leadership at, Psych-High or whatever, volunteering, research experiences, again, helping them kind of go through step by step, identifying the skills that they are gaining in these other things that we know are just parts of their college experience. And then again, the last part of part 1 there is having them think about, okay, what important skills are you lacking, right? So this is after they've done the employable skills survey, right? Thought about the skills that they have. They might identify specific ones. So, active listening is one of the skills that they're going to self-assess in the employable skills survey. And they might think, man, I want to, be a social worker, right, or a therapist, and I am really lacking in active listening skills. And that seems like a problem, right? Like this skill is going to be really important and relevant to kind of my goals that I have for myself. And I'm, haven't had much opportunity to develop that skill. So the last part of part 1 of the workshop here is helping them identify sort of specific skills that they want to make sure that they are developing moving forward. And then the second part, so the second hour of the workshop, is basically walking them through this evidence-based goal setting exercise. So it's based on some previous goal setting work that's been done from the literature. and helping them sort of extract specific goals, right? So the specific skills that they're going to want to learn in some specific time frame, prioritizing those, thinking about the impact that those particular skills will have on them, how they're going to attain them, identifying obstacles, right? External obstacles, internal obstacles, providing them. I have a worksheet again where I provide them all sorts of different examples of ways that they might go about developing these skills. So obviously, courses is one way, but also alternative ways that students have of going out and developing particular skills. How they're going to keep an eye on their progress, right, and monitor it. How will they know that they're working toward, right, and improving themselves in that skill, and then commitment. So it ends with them sort of they can share, right, their plans with one another, that they can write a letter to their future self, right, that they're going to get in a year or not, you know, and see. So anyway, I've developed this workshop. I've done it a couple of times. I'm very, very happy to share my materials with folks. If you are interested, I do hope to kind of put it together and have it published on STP or something in the future. But there's my email if you want any resources that I've mentioned here today and I haven't been able to share with you. But okay, that is, I think, the end of my slides here. And yeah, again, very happy to open it up to either questions or just other people sharing their ideas for, you know, ways that you've embedded, you know, sort of skills into your own classes.